Hey everybody, Angie here from your Digital Photography, Imaging and Workflow class. Welcome! I hope you enjoyed the first class. This is our first Crib Notes video. I like to make these videos from what we did in class just so that you can listen and participate in class instead of having to worry about taking notes and things like that. These are, however, just Crib Notes and are not a substitute for being in class. Questions and discussions happen in class that aren't always covered in the crib notes. However, sometimes these crib notes could go into even more detail about particular things that weren't necessarily covered in class. So really, it's best to attend the class as well as watch these videos. First of all, I'd like to give you my contact information. Hopefully you copied down my cell number in class, though. I really didn't want to put it out there on YouTube, so I removed it from the presentation. If you didn't and still want to get it, just let me know next class and I'll give it to you. My email address, of course, is here, and this is the one I prefer. I have a Niagara College email address, but I very rarely check it. I have enough email addresses as it is and just didn't need one more. If you were to click on the direct link to email me through Blackboard, you'll be sending it to my college address, so don't use that method of contact if at all possible. The email address I really prefer you to use is this one. It's Angie@mystudioNiagara.com. And my website addresses are here as well. I've put a capital H in Angie H Photo just so you don't miss that, but you really don't need to put the capital H in when accessing the site. So anyway, here is what you're going to need for class. If you'd like, you can bring your own laptop, but as I discussed in class, I'm competent when using a Mac, but if you have a Mac laptop, bring it to class and run into issues other than program-related ones, I can't necessarily help you and can't take class time to sort it out. I am a PC girl, and that's what we use in class. If you're not extremely comfortable with your Mac laptop, you may be better off just using the computers supplied to you in the classroom, as it'll be easier to follow along, and I'll be able to help you should you run into any problems or anything. A USB or jump drive. We'll be saving our Lightroom catalogs to the USB each week so that you can continue your work from one class to another or even practice at home. On occasion, we will be using your camera, but really only for a couple of classes. I'll let you know ahead of time anyways when those classes will be and therefore when to bring your camera. You can just leave them at home until then. You were given a handout during the first class that outlined some important information as far as the college goes. They gave you a list of radio stations to listen to in case of inclement weather, parking information and that sort of thing. Since I know we don't always read everything given to us, I include myself in that group, I've also recopied some of the information here. Be sure to check out Blackboard for any sort of class-related information as well as school closings, etc. If the weather is iffy, you can also listen to the local radio stations I've listed here between the hours of 4 and 6 to get the most updated information. Items we're going to cover in class. I'm not going to go through each one. I'm just going to put them up on the screen here so you can pause the video if you'd like, but otherwise we won't bother taking up video time to go through them. They're pretty self-explanatory and are pretty much indicated in the order of importance to the class. The visual size of each bar also relates to the proportionate amount of time that'll be spent on each one in class. I showed you this image of an enlarger that was used to process film prints, and also this finished black and white image of James Dean, which was created from an original that was marked up and annotated to let the processor know what was desired in the final print. Something that brings on a lot of discussion these days is whether or not the use of Photoshop and Lightroom is cheating. And I stand by the fact that you can hardly call it cheating when the exact same thing was traditionally done in the darkroom with different tools. Tools such as burning and dodging tools like this one. The tools could be made in all different shapes and sizes out of nothing more than cardstock or cardboard and mounted on a wire. They would be wiggled or moved around during the exposure between the paper and the light from the enlarger so as to either keep light from striking certain areas for a stretch of time or allow light to hit certain areas of the paper for longer periods of time. This burning and dodging technique is something we know well in Photoshop. It's not cheating. The technology has simply changed and has been made easier. This is not to say that all use of Photoshop or Lightroom is just an upgrade on tradition. When photographs are used as a media for composite artwork, in my opinion, it's really no longer something that can be called a photograph, but it is still artwork. It would be better known as an upgrade on traditional artwork than photographs. Now I'll step off my soapbox for a moment and get into helping you understand how the computer works and thinks. If you have a grasp on how the inner filing system of the computer works, you'll never lose your photographs again. This is a screen capture of Windows Explorer, not to be confused with Internet Explorer. And right now I have the desktop highlighted. The contents of whatever I have highlighted on the left will be shown on the right. I like to compare it to a filing cabinet and think of the drawers as the main drives within the computer, and all of the content as being contained within hanging files or manila folders. The main thing to keep in mind here is that the section noted here as computer is really what houses all of your files and storage drives within your computer. Everything else shown here, such as desktop, libraries, favorites, etc., it's just a shortcut to something that can already be found within that computer title. It's just a means of quicker access. Now, if we were to open that computer section, you'll see a bunch of drives that happen to be connected to my computer at home. Each of these drives is separate from the other and can be identified by the letter that accompanies them. Items listed here can be anything from a USB drive, a CD/DVD drive, a server, portable hard drive, or a partitioned hard drive, just to name a few. They can all be used to store files, photos, or documents and things like that. I've indicated all of the drives over here on the right and depicted them as green hanging folders. If we were to click on the N drive on the left, then we would see on the right all of the manila folders contained within that drive, or green hanging folder. Each one of those can then be opened to reveal either more manila folders or a list of documents and things that may be contained within them. If you have any questions or uncertainty about exactly how this works, make sure you ask in class so that I can help you out. It's really important that you understand this whole process. We're going to have a closer look at the N drive that was indicated on my Windows Explorer screenshot a moment ago there. The N drive on my computer is one of the locations on my server. It's where I keep all of my photos, and this is my filing system. I'm not saying you have to copy it exactly, but it will give you a good outline for creating your own filing system on your own computer. Within that N drive on my server, I file everything by year, then month, then client or event, and then within every client folder or event folder, I'll end up with the following folders, or at the very least by the time I'm done any given job of sets of photos. This can be used for anything from vacation photos to client photos, and it doesn't matter whether you're a hobby photographer or a professional. It's a great way to keep things organized and always be able to find the photos you're looking for quickly and easily. I always keep a folder of the original photos that are completely untouched and are the full size off the camera. I call that folder Originals, of course. That is the file I will reference in Lightroom as I'm creating edited proofs for clients or working through a set of personal images. This is a constant no matter what I'm doing. Also, when I originally import these photos off the memory card from my camera, I also make a backup to a second drive on my server just in case something should happen to the originals. Making your original download of photos through Lightroom allows you that option to back up your photos at the same time. It's a great time saver and a great way to keep things organized and make sure things aren't forgotten. When I'm doing work for clients, I will create a set of proofs. When I do weddings, I create those proofs in both 72 DPI for viewing on the computer and in online galleries and things like that, and a set at 300 DPI for printed proofs. If these are personal photos, you may or may not create all of these folders. If you're creating a slideshow of, say, your vacation photos for friends and family to view, you'll likely create the 5x7 proofs at 72 DPI, but not necessarily the 5x7 proofs at 300. You may just choose simply to edit them in Lightroom and leave them as is until you decide which ones you want to print. At any rate, I've indicated under each folder what version of photos these should contain. These originals are untouched. so nothing done to them. Both sets of proof files are edited and the source files are retouched. Those source files should be full size off your camera with everything done to them. That is to say that editing will have been done on them when you created your proof files, but then all the retouching will be done at the source file level. Having said that, there's a big difference between what is known as editing and what is known as retouching, and we're going to discuss the differences here now. Editing is what I would consider going through all of the photos and choosing your keepers. Also, the editing process can include applying any effects and things that you want to be visible when others are going to view your photos for the first time. It's the vision you had for the photo when you took it. When you took the photo, you may have envisioned it in black and white with a lot of contrast. So when you download the image to your computer, it's in color. It'd be considered editing to quickly turn it to black and white and use a couple of quick tools to create that high contrast you were going for. Retouching of such an image, however, would be taking it to the next step and checking all of your different highlight areas and shadow areas within the image, for example, against the zone chart to see what you needed to adjust individually and making those adjustments. Retouching can also include things in a portrait such as removing blemishes, removing unwanted items from the photo, or basically anything that takes longer than 20 seconds. Editing is more of a global adjustment, where retouching is more of a refined technique. Now let's talk about maximizing your computer equipment. The first thing to note about working with photos on your computer is that your photos should not be kept on your C drive. That's not to say, however, they can't be temporarily kept there. I always keep the current file of photos I'm working on my desktop until the job is completed. I then move them over to my server where I can still easily access them, but they're not cluttering up my C drive that houses my system folder. The C drive runs your computer. I compared this idea to an episode of Hoarders. If your house is completely cluttered and you only have a pathway to maneuver through, you have a hard time getting around your house or finding things quickly when you need them. Your computer is the same way. If it's looking for something that's constantly having to wade through piles of files, it makes sense that it's going to take longer to find that file. If the house is neat and clean and organized, you can find things very quickly and get right to them. So can your computer when it's organized and clean. Options for storing your files could be things such as partitioned hard drives. While this one is one of the best ways to store your data, it's also something that needs to be done when the computer is brand new and does not contain any of your information. Partitioning a hard drive once you've already been using it will delete all of your files. There are a couple of exceptions to this, but to be on the safe side, just don't attempt it with a computer you've already been using. This is something that really can only be done when you're buying a new computer. Have the technicians at the store do it for you before you even leave the store with it. If you want a similar solution with a computer you've been using, you can have another hard drive installed right within the tower of the computer itself without even touching your existing information at all. A portable or external hard drive is another great solution. The only problem with these is that as time goes on, the software that runs the drive can become outdated and may not work on your current computer. I've always been able to solve this issue in one way or another, but issues I've been made aware of is those hard drives becoming corrupt without much explanation as to why. A USB or jump drive is a good temporary solution. Using them for portable documents that you may need to take with you or temporary backup is fine, but just make sure it's extremely temporary. These jump drives are small and can be easily lost or become corrupt if you don't remove them from the computer properly every time before removing them from the USB port on your computer, you could be doing the damage yourself. A server is the solution I choose to go with and is the one I would personally recommend if you intend to do large volumes of photographs. They're fairly expensive though, so consider that before running out to buy one. It has to be worth it for you. They seem to be the most reliable and widely used. Servers are what every company uses for their important files, but we've all heard the horror stories of what can go wrong. As far as I'm concerned, there are risks to every method of storage when concerning electronics. I've listed DVDs here last. The reason for this is that I've heard a lot of bad things about them, but then I have heard bad things about everything. So what are you going to do? The main thing that scares me is that they say DVDs or CDs are really only good for about 7 years. Beyond that, you can't be surprised if you can't retrieve any information from them. Personally, I've never experienced a problem with them, but then again, I've never experienced a problem with portable hard drives, and many others have. This is all just information I know of and would like to pass on to you for what it's worth. If you're out, however, looking for a new computer, I have a couple of things for you to consider. This is what I would do if I were to get a new computer. You need at least 16 gigabytes of RAM in order to run Photoshop efficiently. Unless you're editing videos and stuff like that, 16 gigs is more than enough. I would also get a solid state drive known as an SSD. It has no moving parts and is therefore more reliable than the usual hard drives that come in store-bought computers. It's also faster because the computer is able to go right to where it has the information mapped and retrieve it. Also know that a video card, while important to have a decent one, of course, is not essential. It's not as essential as RAM for Photoshop. A video card becomes more important once again for video editing and gaming. We're going to be discussing and using color spaces in class. Color spaces are extremely important. It's one of the two things that have everything to do with making sure that what you see on your monitor is what you get in your prints. The other factor is monitor calibration, which we'll discuss in a minute. The two color spaces that we use as photographers most is Adobe RGB 1998 and sRGB. Adobe RGB 1998 is a larger color space than sRGB, and therefore your colors are more accurately represented. Having said that, though, you won't notice a difference between the two if you're not comparing them side by side. Both will look very good. I've heard the two color spaces being compared this way. Adobe RGB 1998 is like a box of 64 crayons, while sRGB is more like a box of 32 crayons. Color spaces themselves are systems for representations of shades of color. Some systems simply contain more shades of color than others. Different printing equipment will use different color spaces as limited by their process. While Adobe RGB 1998 is a larger color space, though, sRGB is more widely accepted at labs. CMYK and Pantone are two other color spaces that, as a photographer, you may deal with or run into depending on how your photos are being used. CMYK and Pantone are usually used in publishing, though, for brochures and business cards and things like that. It's the type of equipment used for printing these large volume products that dictates what color space will be used. What you really need to know is how to use the color spaces. Consistency is key when shooting in JPEG. If you know you're going to be using a particular lab to print a final product from photos when you're actually shooting the photographs, you want to capture those images within that color space on your camera. You'll then want to use the same color space when processing the images in Photoshop, and will therefore want to export your images from Lightroom using that same color space. If you're shooting in RAW, the color space doesn't matter until you export from Lightroom. This is another reason I personally like to shoot in RAW. There's a few reasons, but one is just that RAW captures everything possible and doesn't send the images through the processor and camera, throwing away some of the color information potentially. You can then decide later what color space will be used, or even change your mind on what lab you'll be using for printing the images. I'd mentioned before monitor calibration as one of the two things that have everything to do with making sure that what you see on your monitor is what you get from your prints. Monitor calibration is just so important. I can't even stress it enough. If you don't calibrate, you may be making adjustments to your images that don't need to be done, or you may be going in a completely wrong direction. You could be adjusting for a cold-looking photo because it looks bluish on your screen, when in actuality it was a very warm image, and you just go and make it look even more warm by adding yellow to it. Monitor calibration can be done in many ways, but the device pictured here is what can be used for such a procedure. The device will adjust your monitors to what's called neutral, which is exactly what labs do in order to ensure standardized results across the board. This is to say that gray shows as gray without color cast, blacks are black without color cast, and whites are white without any color cast. You can buy these devices from any camera store, and some big box stores such as Best Buy or Henry's also carry them. They come with software that you download to your computer. And once you've done that, you start up the software and answer a few questions that it's going to ask you about your specific monitor. The next step is to hang the device on your monitor as it's shown here, and the software then shows itself colors by way of your monitor. The software knows what color it's currently showing on the monitor, and the device lets the software know what color it's seeing. It will go through a read of many shades of color. When all is said and done, the software will make an adjustment to your monitor settings, and then your monitor is what's known as calibrated. Most monitors come from the store with their saturation pumped up and contrast very high so as to wow the average consumer. When we as photographers use our monitors, we want to see the most accurate representation of what our image looks like. As far as I'm concerned, using a device like this is the most accurate way of calibrating your monitor. When calibrating your monitor, you need to take a few precautions and keep a few things in mind. You need to calibrate in the environment you work in. This is just to say that you need to have your monitor and surroundings in the same places they'd be when you're editing your photos. Lights should be at the same dim level, and windows, if open while you work, need to be left open. However, when you're calibrating and even when you're working, you need to keep lights in the room from falling or reflecting on your monitor. And the ambient light in the room should not only be at the level you usually work at, but it should also be at a relatively subdued level all the time. Don't work in a room with wild colors on the walls. If they reflect on your screen, it will taint what your brain is seeing in the image, and you may therefore make adjustments to the image that you don't need to do or don't need to be made. You could end up getting an image back that looks completely different than what you saw on your monitor. Your monitor needs to be kept in the same position once you calibrate it. Laptops are therefore difficult to work from accurately just for this reason. Any adjustment to your monitor can severely affect the way an image looks to your eyes, if, for instance, something else in the room were to reflect on the screen. The screen should also be kept perpendicular to your face as well as at nose height so that you're not looking up or down at it. They're designed to be looked at straight on. You can use a laptop for editing if you hook it up to a stationary monitor, or at least just double check your work on a stationary monitor before printing it. It kind of goes without saying really that your posture is also very important when working at the computer. If you don't pay attention to this and you spend a lot of time on a computer, you can end up with a lot of aches and pains that you wouldn't have otherwise had. While the woman in this picture is using correct posture, her monitor isn't in the correct position, so let's change that right off the bat. Currently, she's looking over top of the monitor. Okay, better. Now, when in your chair and your feet are flat on the floor, your knees should be at a 90-degree angle so that your thighs are flat and your shins are straight up and down. When you're using your mouse, your elbow should also be at a 90-degree angle, and your back should be straight up and down, and your head straight up and down. Now, for what I'm sure was the biggest question on your mind before you came to class. What is the difference between Lightroom and Photoshop, and why would you use one or the other? Well, here it goes. Lightroom is what's known as non-destructive. Lightroom only refers to the images where they already reside within your computer. It shows you a preview of the image. You're not actually editing the photo. Lightroom creates notes along the way as to what you want done with the photo. What this means is that you can do whatever you want to those preview images you're seeing on the screen, and it's not doing anything to the original file. When you're done editing your image and export, Lightroom takes the notes it's created and a copy of the photo and kind of merges them together to create the final look you wanted. It only has to do what it needs to the image to get the final look you created. In Photoshop, you're working right on the image. If you do something, decide you don't like it, then do something else, it's possible that Photoshop has thrown away some of the information in the photo. You're damaging the photo as you go because although it's not doing anything to the original image in real time, you have to save that version of the photo you were working on. And Photoshop has to basically follow all of the steps you took in arriving at that final look, so you're saving the damage as well. Lightroom refers to what's known as catalogs. It's the perfect name for it, really, because using Lightroom is like making notes or circling items in a Sears catalog for your Christmas wish list. Making notes in the catalog doesn't change the stock on the shelves at Sears. You can do whatever you like in the catalog, write whatever you'd like, or circle whatever you'd like, and it doesn't affect anything at Sears. Similar to the Sears catalog, you can make your notes in Lightroom and then close the program. It does nothing to the actual files on the computer. It's simply taking notes or creating text files. You'll pick up right where you left off the next time you open Lightroom, just like you would pick up right where you left off the next time you open up your catalog with your notes in it. You never have to hit save. Sears will never ship anything to you or charge your credit card for anything unless you actually place the order over the phone or the computer. Lightroom will actually never do anything to your original files, period. Whenever you export from Lightroom, it creates a copy of the original. It will never, ever overwrite the original unless, of course, you tell it to. It's possible to overwrite the original, but you have to actually tell it to overwrite the original without warning when exporting, as well as export back to the original folder. And who would choose those options? So you really don't need to worry about it. And I'll show you this in a future class. It's one of those first two options in the export menu. So as I mentioned, you have to actually save your changes in Photoshop before closing the image or Photoshop, or all will be lost. That is a big contrast to Lightroom. You literally do nothing. You hit the X to close the program and everything will still be there when you come back. Also, if you've ever used Photoshop or Lightroom, you'll know there's something called history. They both have it, but the difference is in Lightroom, the history is always there regardless of whether or not you move on to the next photo or close down the program or anything like that. In Photoshop, once you close the image, the history is gone. You can't ever back up unless you've worked in layers that you can delete to get back to your original, and unless you remember what you did to get a certain look, you'll never know how you arrived at your final image. The history is just gone and there is no way of knowing. As far as I'm concerned, for photographers just editing their photos, the advantage goes to Lightroom. If you don't have either program and you can only afford to buy one, I would go with Lightroom. Its cataloging system we're going to work with in class is well worth it just on its own. The other big advantage is the fact that it saves the history and you can back up any time to any point in your editing process. You can also do any necessary retouching in Lightroom. I find that Photoshop is a little more friendly for some retouching processes, but there's pretty much always a means to do the same thing in Lightroom, and it's just a matter of getting used to doing it that way. And finally, this is the imaging and workflow class. What exactly is workflow? Workflow is simply a series of steps taken to complete the job from start to finish. That's my definition anyway. It's not very technical, but that's what it is in plain English. The workflow we'll be following in class, and what I find to be the perfect workflow for any job, is outlined in 6 steps. Step 1, capture good quality images. You have to make sure you get it right in camera first, so that you spend your time enhancing and not fixing. Always remember, I hate that fixing word. Step 2, get them into your computer in an organized manner so as to know exactly where they are. You can't work on your photos if you can't find them. Also, if you can't find them and are somehow able to download another copy, you'll end up with multiples of the same thing and clog up your storage space. Step 3, you'll need to cull through and decide which ones are keepers. No point in keeping ones that no one wants and you're not going to do anything with anyway. At the very least, you'll want to pick out your favorites. Step 4, you'll need to proof or edit your photos. You had a certain vision when you took these photos. Make sure anyone looking at the proofs sees what your vision was. Don't spend a lot of time in the editing process, though. Save it for the retouching step when you know exactly which images need the retouching time invested. Step 5, prepare for proper output, whether it be screen viewing or print. You may need to create different size versions of the of the file if you're printing. Once you have your final size determined and created for printing, you'll need to crop, sharpen, and add noise. Those will be your last 3 steps in any workflow for making prints. Every different size of the image will require a different amount of sharpening and a different amount of noise. Step 6. Finally, you'll upload to either order the prints, show them in an online gallery, or create proof prints. Or you'll be printing them, or maybe all of the above. It's quite possible these are all important images. You may be showing them online, creating proof prints, and making enlargements. No matter what type of images you're creating, always keep the final outcome in mind and you'll never be disappointed.